even helped some people a lot. There's some other folks who it doesn't suit. So we're getting there soon. I think in another couple minutes we'll get started for those of you who have joined us. We'll let the participant count get a little higher up because I know there were lots of RSVPs. Thank you so much, Rachel, for making yourself available. We have a lot to learn. We've been doing several of these conversations with heads of D&I, heads of diversity, from some other industries, and so curious what your experience has been. Suddenly it's like so front and center for all of us, certainly in the US.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing how business, it's like such a huge concern inside the four walls of business. You know, in the past, George Floyd being killed by a police officer was just a political thing. And businesses now, really, like this year, I feel that is one of the really huge changes.
Do you mean the conversation coming from outside to inside?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it used to be almost like a taboo, right? To have certain conversations internally, and you would say you would leave it at the door, you know, especially if it tied to social justice or anything on the political side, you can't talk about it. But we have moved fairly quickly to having these conversations. And I'm sure I'll share with you what we've been doing internally, but it's no longer leave it at the door. We're actually embracing the conversation more so now.
Yeah. Well, why don't we get started? Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. We have a lot to learn, I think, from Pfizer's Global D&I Lead. It is a privilege to have you, Rachel Cheeks-Givan, from the Bronx, and here I am in Queens, broadcasting to all of you everywhere, for a conversation on what's going on with diversity and inclusion at this really unique time. I don't think it's ever been more front and center in American business than it is now. Certainly not in my career. It was always sort of an edge issue. It was part of like a broad set of sustainability and responsibility kind of goals, and maybe a bullet point on a PowerPoint or something. And all of a sudden, a huge amount of my time at Knotel this last few months has been about this. We've rewritten our goals and reimagined the purpose of our business in the first place. There are teams who dedicate their time to diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism, even more specifically at Knotel right now. And for you, Rachel, a person with a substantial career, decades, you know, leading efforts on this, what does that feel like? It's like about time, maybe. I don't know.
Well, you know, the word that comes to my mind, it's been like an awakening. I feel like, and the word has been used over and over again. But I mean, I came into this space being a former CPA accountant, and I transferred into D&I because there was a focus on the numbers and the accountability in the space. And then it's transformed over time, really getting engaged and moving more into the human resource area of diversity and inclusion. So I was busy before, but I have to say that in the last few months, it's been interesting how I've been engaged in the conversations with, I support 6 business units. So 6 of our senior leaders, all various related to the support business, from legal, compliance, corporate affairs, the chief business office, the strategy office, digital. I mean, very different in their businesses. So what it's been for me, it's been having these conversations around this space, all of a sudden, all 6 at the same time. Before I was able to pace things around this, you know, I can talk to this group, get every, you know, kind of figure out my scheduling there on where to focus. But right now, because of what's gone on, it's been exciting and refreshing for me. I'm quite energized by the fact of the focus. But Amol, I have to tell you, I tell everyone this one, that I'm glad we're talking now. And again, this is with, I want the message to come across, positive intent. These leaders have positive intent as to why they want to have different conversations with me about it now. But what I say is, I don't want this to be about the moment. And I think you've probably heard that from previous D&I leaders, I'm sure, that have talked to you. I want to make sure it's sustainable. Let's have this conversation 30 days from now, 60 days from now, 6 months from now. a year from now. I don't want this to be that this is the moment. So for me, I've been in it, like you know, for over almost 20 years now in the D&I space. And I've had conversations, but the conversations are quite different now because I think people want to take action. It's no longer, I'm going to sit on the sideline. You're going to talk about diversity and inclusion. I'm supposed to listen to you. But now I see where leaders are having a different conversation in terms of active engagement. They want to take action. And I've used this analogy. It's almost like the baby right now that's running, right? So I have, you know, babies that are running or that they're trying to grow fairly quickly. And I have them all around me going, this is great. I want you to take action. And I feel like my role as a leader and the expertise and really getting them to think about it strategically, it's great to take action, but let's just make sure, let's look at the big picture. What's our strategy? And when we do take action, is it really leading to change, right? And I always throw out the word breakthrough change, right? Or are we just saying, let's have this Heritage Month or things like that? Those things are good to do, but let's have the conversation about what's getting in the way. So it's more of a strategic dialogue, almost like yourself, right? In your role as a leader. I'm sure, you know, you want to have those conversations that are very authentic around what's getting in the way. Like, there are things, yes, we can do, but I want to focus on the hard stuff, right? And the things that I can't just spew out an answer, right? And I'm saying, no, we have to think about this and let's work together and really come up with a more thoughtful response. Yes, you can do these things in the meantime that may make us feel good. It might change the game, you know, a little bit, but I want to get into the hard stuff.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the hard stuff. I mean, it's interesting. For a second there, I was thinking, wow, this is probably the first time you've been having to tell people to slow down from your vantage as a leader of D&I.
Yeah, I don't want that, right? Like, it's very hard because you don't want them to, like, I don't want them to think, I want you to just slow down, but I just want you to be very thoughtful. You can move that fast, but let's stop and be thoughtful and strategic about.
Well, and I think what you mean is like, you want to have impact. You don't, it's not just action for the sake of showing a lot of motion. So yeah, let's why don't we tease those apart a little bit, right? I mean, from your time at Pepsi to now your time at Pfizer, it's a pretty big mandate. I mean, if you get your head around it, it's like, wow, I have this company, I don't know, is there, Pepsi, I assume, was 100,000 plus. Pfizer's kind of that scale in terms of it's in every country. There's so many people. And if you take seriously the importance of this moral purpose, you can get overwhelmed pretty fast, right? It's like, wow, this is just little old me, and I got to somehow turn this huge organization, just turn it almost 180. I mean, depending on what your assessment is of where we started. Gosh, that's big. And even more, you want to have the real impact, not just the window dressing. So help me figure out what are some of the pitfalls that you've seen folks get trapped that seem just too easy, too fast, or where is the deeper impact we should be hunting for?
Yeah, and I really want to touch upon something that you said, because I think a lot of times people think D&I leaders, they're doing this on their own, right? So for me, where I start with, I go into it knowing it's not just me. I have the rest of the organization to tap into, right? And who are the key influencers first that can help move the agenda forward, right? Who are those champions? Because if not, I will get buried in, or what happens sometimes is the term diversity fatigue, right? Trying to do all these things, and then you look up, you're like, what did we actually do? So to answer your question, it's really trying to get to that impact. And I start with numbers. I start with the data, let the data drive where we should focus, because it's been interesting. Sometimes people think, I've had leaders say, we need to focus on hiring, because typically people think diversity, it's about diversity recruiting. And I come at it, it's all across the talent management lifecycle. It's every piece of it. And because it can feel overwhelming, if you look at the data, that usually helps drive where you should focus. And then I try to bring in others. I have not done this work by myself, even from Pepsi to here at Pfizer. I think the most effective way is whether you have a task force or a group of engaged key influencers within the organization. I think you will go a longer way. And let's not forget, it starts at the top with someone like yourself, having the commitment and actually sharing the commitment and the accountability to their direct reports, and then making sure that that message is cascaded throughout the organization. So I hope that that's one of the things I've learned. I've seen some leaders get caught up in, they feel like they have to be the one, right? And in fact, I would say, and you know this from basic leadership, in some cases, it's probably better that I kind of hear from the others on what they think, right? And really, I feel like my role is as a coach to help guide the ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a way that's within the confines of the culture, which is another aspect of this that makes it a little bit different. For me, I've been at 2 large companies, both with very different cultures. We're all trying to get to the same end result, right, around diversity, improve our diversity inclusion efforts, but the way to go about it might be differently, and really thinking about the confines of the structure, the organizational structure, on how to make a difference and move that ship in a way that's going to drive the impact that we're looking for.
Okay, so this is an important lesson, right? The coalition building around the organization,
Yeah.
figuring out the sources of power and how to link them together on a certain kind of aim. Hugely important, whatever your job. I mean, if you're doing marketing, you probably need to take that lesson as well. But what are the deep impact? I mean, I was surprised. It's like companies are still struggling to do recruiting in a way that is successful in building the early candidate and the early tenure diversity. In tech and in the startup world where I've spent most of my career, we're terrible at that, and we're famous for being bad at it and just blaming other people further up the pipeline for causing our problems. So, that's a hard problem, I thought. And you're saying actually it's not the only problem when you think about diversity. It's through the talent life cycle.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to the recruiting one because my eyes have been opened up a lot more. In my current role at Pfizer, it was created about a year ago. It shifted from being more global enterprise, and the same way I had it at PepsiCo, looking very much so across the enterprise globally. So you don't really go deep. This role that I'm in now, I'm pretty much like the head of D&I for a particular BU. And it really gives you a different line of sight because you go deep and you really get into the life cycle, which is the talent management life cycle. So you're not only looking at hiring, you're looking at what's getting in the way with promotions and advancement. Are we looking at retention? Because you could do all the work to bring people in, but are they staying? What's the culture like? What else do we need to do to make sure we have commitment, from our leaders to really help move some of these things forward? So when I get back to the hiring and the recruiting, some of the things, it goes back to, who are the partners you're working with? What we realized, we didn't have those diversity partners to really help us with that. Another one could be, and this is one that's been, I'm really proud of, is that you may have to go earlier in the life cycle. Like I support digital. We have to sometimes go, and it might seem like it's not going to make a difference, starting early on, right? It might be with high school students, like building our own pipeline. And that can feel like a huge undertaking, right? But when you think about it strategically, that you have a long runway, right? And you already know in a particular industry, as you said, if you can't find the talent, as we would any other business issue, we might say, well, we might have to grow our own, right? Either we look at the talent internally, or we might have to go sooner in that life cycle before they get to us. We might have to start building those relationships and planting those seeds. And I know at Pfizer, we're looking at in certain areas where we might have to really make certain investments in certain areas. If we I always challenge, and I know I've heard, other D&I leaders say, and we've all experienced this, where you'll hear someone say, well, I can't find the talent, right? So that's one that comes up. My role is to challenge that. We can go out there, maybe we're not sourcing it the right way. Maybe we're going after the same talent. For us, I support digital. Why are we going to the same places the Googles of the world are going to, right? Maybe we need to shift and go somewhere else. So there is a talent pool. You just have to make a decision. Do I want to go to the same talent pool and compete with everyone else? And I'm not saying get less qualified talent. It's just untapping or realizing that there is another potential source of talent pool and going after that.
Right, where you have a competitive advantage You have a
Exactly.
problem to solve and you want to solve it in a way that you can win. And I guess the goal is a business case, right? This is a thing that you've said often, I believe, that you don't just do diversity and inclusion because it's nice. It is an important thing to do. It's right, but it also makes the business better. And I don't know if you're still trying to make this case inside your organization, but how would you make it for those who are here listening, because they want to go back to their organization and make this case? What's the business case? I mean, I've heard it. We've all read it a little bit here and there. You know, boards that are more diverse outperform or something like that.
And I'm sure I don't have to go through all that. There's always that term. There's the war for talent. There's, there's the business case. And let me give you a story I'll share with you. There's one from PepsiCo that I still can think of today, and so proud of that one. We had someone that he was a janitor at one of our locations. He was Latino Hispanic, and he lived in Los Angeles, right? And he knew the culture of the Latino culture and thought to himself, you know what, why are we not using different flavorings or seasonings, right? In terms of innovation, right? And this is driving diversity and inclusion with innovation. And he actually brought to the organization as a janitor, and I'm saying it that way because sometimes we don't realize ideas can come from anywhere, right? It's not just from the top of the house. He was able to push this idea through within the organization. And if you know that the brand became $1 billion brand, the Doritos, right? The guacamole Doritos. There was another
I love
brand.
those.
Yeah.
What?
So
That guy?
if you just think about it, I'm shortening the whole story, but what he went through in terms of, when you have an environment where you truly believe in innovation and different thoughts and perspectives, right, from a diversity standpoint matter, you can uncover and unlock some amazing ideas, right? But you got to create that culture where that matters, right? So we always hear inclusion matters, diversity matters, there's the business case. That was one example that from the business case, it drove other leaders within the organization to really stop and think, how do I get the value of diversity within my respective business? So now when I bring it to Pfizer, I look at it a little bit differently, right? Because I think of PepsiCo is a little bit sexy with the products. You got the drinks, you got the, you could tangibly see some of these things. So it's easier. And those that are in marketing, it's great because you can, really tailor it to certain cohorts of groups, right? That makes sense. And you can come up with more innovative flavors and ideas. But when I bring it to Pfizer, that's when I realized the value of diversity, where you want to close the healthcare disparities that we have in this country and around the world. And this is just from a personal standpoint. I live in the Bronx that I shared with you. Do you know, Amol, that for many years, and I still do, and this could be my own bias, I don't get my healthcare in the Bronx because I sometimes think, and it could be my own bias, and please, I want everybody to know, this is my own bias and I'm admitting it. I felt that maybe the service was not as great. I wasn't sure if the care was going to be as the same kind of care as where I delivered my daughter at Greenwich Hospital, because it just happened to be not too far from PepsiCo. It was easy, but I did see a difference in the care, right? So it got in my mind, what a great way for a company like Pfizer, where we have the opportunity from a diversity standpoint to close those healthcare disparities that are in the diverse communities, right? Whether it's from medicines or making a difference from access to, right, some of the medicines that we have that maybe someone may not be able to get to because of their background. So when you stop and think about how can you drive equity in the business that you're in and think about it from a business standpoint, it really helps you focus. To get back to what you were saying earlier, it doesn't become this overwhelming part if you really have that compass around how can I drive equity in my business, no matter what that is. And I think I shared with you talking to recently, a completely different industry. Let's say it was the farmers, right? I mean, everyone has some sort of opportunity to drive equity, right, within their respective business. It's just trying to figure out what that is and really go all out, go all the way in trying to do that. You were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, you're inspiring. This is inspiring, right? This is why to do it, right? This is you can make money off an awesome new kind of chip. You can go fill a pocket that's been historically underserved. People are dying. They're not getting the care they deserve. This is amazing. But what are the ingredients? So now, you're a numbers person, and you're looking around your org. Like, what do the numbers need to be to invent that new guacamole Dorito, or to put enough organizational focus on, well, why are these communities not getting the normal primary care visits that other communities are getting, or whatever? Like, is it a numbers game? It's like, oh, okay, well, let's get to 15% Black people in our company, and that represents the North American average, and then we'll be there. Or, I mean, what is the?
It's a great question. I think numbers is a good starting point. You got to know where you are, right? That's a good starting point. But I like to always know who are the people behind the numbers, right? And then to something you just said, if you don't have the people in the right places to make those decisions, you can have things happen where, let's say, a commercial goes out and everyone wonders, like, oh my gosh, what happened there? Why did we do that? I'm not going to name any, but it happened few times when I was at my previous employer, and you wonder, or people wonder, like, well, how does something like that happen, right? From a diversity where you step on a rake, it's because you don't have people sitting in the room of key influence, which is why you should start at the top and really make sure that you have those of influence that people can look up and see, but you have to have them in the room to be able to help create the opportunities or help you don't step on a rake, and how do you do that? You really, for me, I think you have to look at every level, not only at the senior levels and making sure you have people that are in the room, and whether it's the boardroom or the corporate office or your leadership team, right, that's talking to you. It's so important to have the diverse perspectives sitting in the room, but it's at even the pipeline, right? Because you can have a very heavy top leadership, diverse, but yet you don't have the pipeline. Right? You look back, you're like, well, if I leave today, who's going to step into this position? Do we have those colleagues ready to step into those roles? And that's why I keep coming back to, yes, it's numbers. I think that's a good way to start so you know where to focus, but it's also just as important to make sure, do you have the right people in the right place at the right time? Have you looked at your entire life cycle to see, even in your pipeline, what I have seen in research, and I'm just speaking in general sense, and you probably can see that what some research has said, probably, I might be stepping out here. This is not exact percentages, but I would say most companies probably have a lot of diversity at the lower levels, right? But it's about, okay, what happens beyond that point? Is there a broken rung, which is what McKinsey uses? The broken rung is where you don't see colleagues move from the entry level to manager level, which will prevent you in the long term in having those of diverse backgrounds, or even women actually, in positions of power, right? And it starts early in the pipeline cycle. Another one, you want to know, well, how do you get there, right? So even with the recruiting piece, you have the interview slates, right? And I think you've heard of the Rooney Rule, right? Like the Rooney Rule that they had in football. You want to make sure that you had enough, the managers that are in the football league that are on the slate to be interviewed. Well, yeah, you want to make sure you do that, because research has shown that if you have one woman, and you could apply it to a minority on the candidate slate, your chances of hiring one is 0. But if you add 2, right, you get a 50% chance. You add 3, you get there. And I think I heard recently I was at a conference yesterday virtually, said they went ahead and said, you know what, we want a complete diverse slate, and we'll get a diverse candidate, right? But that's the leadership at the top, right? It starts with you and others at the top, and making these really, I don't call them tough decisions. They're more like, these decisions that that you want to make a difference that's going to change the game. Not a little, we're going to have someone on the slate. No, you know what? We're actually going to hold that position open, and we're going to wait until we have, that diverse slate. And that's hard to do for leaders. I know I've been in that position, and like, I want to fill this role. Yeah, well, if we want diversity, as we said, and we want to be held accountable, you might hold it open, And you know what? We want our leadership, or leaders like yourself, we're not going to hire anyone at that leadership level until you see it, for example. You would have to approve that slate or approve that hire. So there's a lot of different ways, but what I found is that some of it bumps up against the grain of the culture and the way we've been operating. And it might require you, I know you use the word, and most business people don't want to slow down, but in some instances, you might have to slow down the process and to really make sure that you've removed some of these barriers or systemic barriers that are in the system, right? And that's the last thing I'll say is really identify what are those systemic barriers. So these are the conversations I'm having now. I think it's been interesting. It's really stepping back, right? We put accountabilities in place around goals. You know, our goals are focused at the senior leadership level and changing the game up there, but really looking at, well, what's getting in the way? You know, what is it? And it's interesting when you have the conversations, it's, oh, you know what? We closed that role in a week. Yeah, well, you didn't give anybody a chance to get the diverse slate. So maybe if we open that up a little, we might. Or can we be proactive and maybe leverage our own network internally and have them have a chance with referrals? We probably might have a better chance of bringing in a diverse candidate. So I went about that a long way, but I think that there's a lot to unpack there.
There is a lot. Yeah. I mean, you were also introducing the importance of inclusion alongside diversity. I think for some time, diversity used to appear on its own. And increasingly, when you go find what's getting in the way, it turns out you're hiring people that are not being included, therefore they're not being successful. And now your pipeline's leaky all over the place. You're not able to retain the diversity that you were hunting for. But you had, I mean, those numbers on the Rooney Rule that you were mentioning about, you know, making sure the slate is representative enough, not just a tiny bit, because you end up with just the stereotypical one candidate not getting selected. You have to have enough people, or maybe all people, that help you with your overall diversity aims. There's a related sort of numbers question I was curious about. I've seen some research, and this is in the context of gender. I wouldn't be surprised if it's true for race as well, that men judge the diversity of a group implicitly and without thinking about it. They kind of like double the number of women that are actually there. So if you ask them to estimate, you know, oh, is this group diverse? When it's 15 or 20% women, they'll say it's 50-50 or something like that when you're looking at an audience. And I wonder if you've seen any other numbers like that, because when I saw that statistic, one thing I thought was interesting is that the women don't misjudge it. The women feel very lonely when they're only 10 or 15%, but there is a threshold where they start feeling comfortable, and it's not 50. So the statistic I had seen was that around 30%, the minority group starts feeling like, all right, there's enough of us here. I can say something without it being me taking all the sanction. And I wonder if you have some kind of rule of thumb as you think about, all right, when are we actually getting close? If we're not 50-50, if we're not perfect, well, what's close enough that maybe we could see the impact start?
You know what? I think if I could answer that question, I would get $1 million on that one. But I think, you know, it's one of those things. I'm going to flip it a little bit, because I think it comes up a lot. Like, what's that number, Rachel? Like, what's my magic number? You know, I don't want to put a number on it, and I don't. I don't do that, because I think what happens is people get comfortable with, well, I met that 30%, I'm done, right? And I would say, if I was to flip it, no, how many do you need to really change the game for your business, right? If you want to grow your business, do you have enough diverse perspectives sitting in the room? And it might be gender, it might be minorities, it might be someone from a different ability, right? It might be someone that's from the GLBTQ community. But to me, there's no magic number. I know we have our EEO and all those kind of things that we have to strive for. But I think if we put a limit on that, I think that's where you might be missing the opportunity. But we do have goals, right? We have goals at my company. We have it at the top level. But we try to, like, I try to say, look, that's at the minimum, right? That's, you know, people might use 50%. At PepsiCo, it was parity. It was 50% hires had to be diverse, right? 50% promotions compared to white males had to be diverse. And the retention was another one, right? So if you're, or the termination rate for white males was a certain percentage, it had to be the same at parity for diverse, right? That worked, but that was many years ago, right? And to your point, it's one thing with the numbers, but it's also, and you said this, you know, we say we want diversity, right? We say, oh, it's the marketing group. We want to bring in someone that's a sociologist, I don't know, some completely different background. But when they get to the organization right away, we want to change them and we want to make them into who we are. You know, this is how we operate here, as opposed to valuing the diversity. So my point is, the numbers is one thing, but for me, it's more important to get behind the numbers and to create that environment where everyone feels that they are being heard, they're being cared for, right? And you feel that, and they're being valued for what you brought them into the organization. And if that's one or two people, three people, that's a good start. And until you feel that you have the diverse points of views, and I would, you know, I would challenge as a CEO, if you look around in the room and you're having a major business dilemma, I would always stop and ask myself, if I was the CEO, I would say, do I have all perspectives in this room? I wonder if it may not be your direct reports. Is it someone else that's sitting somewhere else in the organization that we need to consider to sit in this conversation with us? Or is it someone externally? So, you know, I'm not going to hit, you know, throw out the exact number, because I think we could say 30% and that might be one person, and then you're happy, you know. So I don't know, right? I'd rather.
Yeah, I think that's a deep way of answering the question, and it sets a high standard. I mean, no number matches the impact of real action. You know, of the substantive diversity. And that's something that we would, I guess, have to hold ourselves as judges of, like, have we actually got all those perspectives? I think it is a very high standard. And I suspect you're going to have a high standard on where my mind is going next. I mean, this notion, as we've been watching this last 4 or 5 months here in America, and to an extent it's global, but I do think it's a uniquely American moment since George Floyd was killed by that police officer. And it's been so, I mean, for me, very emotional. And Absolutely. And the latest wave of it, Jacob Blake, I mean, the Rochester, I'm just like, and I honestly was surprised how I felt. And I was more surprised how broad and deep that feeling was in our company. Mm-hmm. Every member of the staff just falling apart, and how much impact that's had on us as Knotel. I mean, just changing our articulation of what our purpose was. And I wonder, for you as an observer of all this corporate reaction, you know, what's your take? You know, the Instagram takeovers all the way to the whatever's, like, I wonder what you feel.
You know, thank you, you know, for asking. I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable here. I have to say that, you know, when I'm in this space, all of those like myself that were doing this work, there was a couple of weeks there that you're so focused on the work and what's happening internally, I didn't have a chance to actually take it in myself. And then at Pfizer, we had one of our leaders, one of our HR leaders, hold a global, not a global, but yeah, it was a global conversation about the social injustice. Keep in mind, Pfizer's a very conservative company. You know, we're tied to rules and regulations, right? The industry rules. I didn't expect this kind of conversation. And this was the first time for me that I was asked, as a Black colleague, I'm also part Hispanic background as well, to share how I was feeling about it. And I literally, you know, I broke down on a call with colleagues. And I think it opened it up for others as well, especially African Americans. This was early on. And then I started to have more of these conversations outside of work, my daughter's school, right, in my community, because everyone knows, you know, I'm in this space. And it really was the first time that, you know, I had to think about it for myself and what this meant. And I'm going to be fully transparent here. With all the work, I think I was actually beating myself up and saying, and feeling guilty. I've been working in this space. Have I made a difference? Right? You start asking yourself that question. And I know I wasn't alone. You start saying, are we starting all over again? And for me, I'm saying I've been in this almost 20 years. I felt like we took so many steps back, but then I became hopeful, Amal, because I saw that it wasn't just Black colleagues feeling this way, as you said. It was my colleagues all over. And then wanting to have a conversation. And within our organization, our CEO sent out a letter and encouraged these courageous conversations for people to have it. He encouraged the leaders within the organizations to host these kind of conversations internally. And I think it did change our culture a little bit, where people feel more comfortable now talking about race, talking about diversity. And in fact, I know I keep using the baby running, like now I got people really pushing the envelope, right? And saying, well, wait a minute, is that right? You know, what are we saying here? And I love it, but it really helped me emotionally really figure out, you know, what have we been doing? Like, did we do enough? And we have been. We've moved along the journey. Now it's, how do we take where we are and take full advantage of it and continue to move the needle? And we made leaps in the last few months that I have to be honest, it's taken years, right? For someone in my role, I said, my gosh, we did that in 2 months, 2 or 3 months, right? But you know what it shows you? That our leaders have the power to change and influence. And not only the leaders, each and every one of us have the power to change this whole dynamic, no matter where you sit in the organization, right? I'm talking to admins, you know, I'm talking to everyone up and down the level, because everyone should feel encouraged and empowered to drive the change around diversity and inclusion, not just our leaders. So I just, you brought me back to, it was very emotional for me, and the first time in my entire career that I felt it in my heart. It wasn't something that I was just talking about the strategy, right? I'm always like the business, the strategy. I actually had to stop and think about, you know, this is real and it's impacting all of us right now. And why hasn't it changed? What do I need to do differently? How do I change the conversation that we're having? How do I help my leaders feel uncomfortable about being uncomfortable right now? And I think that's where it was for me, having these smaller conversations and dialogues, even with, you know, white males, being very comfortable in saying, I don't know what to do here, right? And
it has been, it was
yeah.
absolutely unique. I mean, I think a feature of what was so unique about this moment, these last few months, is we all knew it was on everyone else's minds. So
Yep.
we might have all privately wanted to do better in the past, but you wouldn't have known that you could walk into any meeting room on any topic and just say, what are we doing about racism at our company?
Right.
And there could have been a meeting about, you know, the Q2 numbers or something. Everything's off, guys. Surely we're thinking about this, but it also raises the bar. And I wonder if this is
Yes.
part of what was on your mind, and this feeling like there have been moments these last few months where I've been introduced to the idea that D&I is not enough. D&I, forget about it. Anti-racism, it's far beyond what can be done through the traditional tools of diversity, equity, inclusion. Maybe you've bumped into this point of view. I wonder how you feel. I mean, it feels a little bit weird because, of course, we're pointing in the same direction, right? Whether we're pushing for diversity, but I guess the argument on anti-racism is that forget your numbers and your pipeline. The business of this company is oppressive. You know, we got to go way further. And I wonder if this is something you've been trying to process.
Yeah, Amal, I mean, I'm just thinking right now, I mean, we're talking about Black Lives Matter, all this. It just, again, a few months ago, that might have been left at the door, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're having a global conversation on race, globally. So I'm on a small committee task force where there are representatives from each one of the regions from around the world. We're going to talk about race. That would have never happened. And then we're actually going to have, our keynote speaker is Dr. Ibram Kendi, right? On how to be an anti-racist. Yeah, I'm saying to myself, hello, like this is major. And I've done speakers. Over the 20 years, I've had many celebrities come and speak. But for us to have someone talk about how to be an anti-racist, not North America, globally. So I'm having conversations, like even helping those outside North America understand. They didn't even understand the term bystander, right? What does that mean? You know, so we have a lot to unpack, But the sheer fact that this is coming from our chairman and CEO, he wanted a global conversation on race. And we spend a lot of conversation, you go through this whole process. What's the theme? How do we vet? How do we get to a speaker? Because there were a number of people. And we landed on right now, at this moment, we have to help our colleagues combat racism. We have to help our colleagues understand you can't be a bystander, right? And how you can, drive change. And I had the fortune of participating, I mentioned, in a conference yesterday with the Center for Talent Innovation. They just changed their name, GoQuil, and we're a member of that organization. And I've been a part of that for many years in this space. And I got to hear Dr. Ibram Kendi, and he said something very interesting around, whatever you do, you should ask that question, whatever you're planning to do, is it driving inequity or equality? And so I'm looking forward to the conversation globally, because even with that, it's just where I'm realizing, right? We know it's going to be different could be very different by every country, right? But race seems to be one that we thought was just a US conversation. And we saw with George Floyd, it went global, right? I mean, it did go global, but now it's taking it to the next step. What is your equity that you need to solve for within your region, right? That's going to look very different than what it is for us in North America, and build upon the race, but take it to the next level. Is it class? Is it education? Is it something else? And I'm looking forward to that. But I never thought we would have landed here with the speaker. And guess what, Amol? No pushback. I mean, really, like I was expecting, okay, let's get ready, let's explain why, but no, that's it. And so it says to me that organizations or leaders now are ready to have this tough conversation and dialogue. And I say the word tough, but it's a discussion, as you said, that we may not have wanted to have before, or we thought, again, it's not something we do. And now there's such openness to have the dialogue. I welcome it. And I'm hopeful that that's going to continue to move us forward. Now, I don't want us to continue with what's been happening. I think that's a whole nother conversation that we can get into around why does it continue to happen, in terms of the social injustice. That to me is just, it's scary, and I live it every day. My husband goes out every day. I have nephews, and now it's women too. It doesn't matter. But, the experience that you face as an African American when you leave your home is now known to everyone, right? And so the question, well, it's getting out there, right? I think people are listening more to it. But what can you do to make a difference as it relates to that?
Maybe a last question for you, given the time we have together. If the engine has started in a way that you've been waiting for some time, suddenly everyone's like motivated and they're moving. And what do you think are some reasonable expectations, that, unlike the baby running that might tip over and go in the wrong direction? What are a handful of things you'd really like to see emerge, either from your company or from corporates largely, so that, next summer when we meet in person, because we're no longer worried about quarantine and all, you'll be able to say, we accomplished a lot last year. It was really hard and it was emotionally difficult, but we got people pointed in a good spot. And here are 2 or 3 things that I've seen a lot of companies adopt. And I think this is huge progress. It took 20 years to happen, but it all crystallized in a few months.
Absolutely. Well, one, I want to see that baby grow up to a thriving adult in this space, right? In a short amount of time, right? So that was just an analogy. But what I would like to see, my vision is that our leaders feel comfortable in this space to continue to push the envelope and then drive it not only from a social justice standpoint, right? We move from social distancing to social justice to now move it towards really looking at the value proposition for our business and really looking at how we can make a difference in the world, knowing our core competency as a business. If it's healthcare, what are we doing to really drive the equities within healthcare? I would love to see every leader think about that question on how they could change the game. the other thing is it's where everyone else, including myself, that we become these stewards of really understanding not only our own culture, because I'm guilty of that. I still have a lot to learn about my own, but really step out there and learn about other cultures, not just about your own. And I say, even for me, understanding the other side of this equation. Why do you feel that this is not an advantage for you? Right? Because I think I get hearing that now. Is this something that's just for diverse? You know, I'm a white male. I don't feel that I'm a part of this, but I feel that for me, a year from now, that everyone feels that they have a part in this. And then lastly, just as not only as an organization, but as, you know, a country, that we have really made a difference in thinking about the impact of all that's been going on and what we can do to make a difference for the next generation. As I said, I have a 12-year-old. I feel this sense of, you know, I have to make this different for her. I mean, I didn't grow up seeing or thinking that you could ever have a Black president, right? Or a woman president. So some of these things for me, I'm coming at it on what are we doing to change the game for the next generation? Because they're thinking differently about this, right? And what are we doing to make sure that it is sustainable and we're making true breakthrough change, not these little changes. Those are good. Don't forget about those, but really making a major change within your respective industry.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I think the call for breakthrough change is going to land certainly on me, and I think for many who have been watching. Thank you so much. I think we've really learned a lot from you, and thanks for all who tuned in. I'm sure some of you will want to share what you heard today with a friend or a colleague, and we have recorded our conversation with Rachel today, and we'll be posting it on the Knotel website if that's okay with you, and people can follow up and share, because I think there's so much to take away from what you taught us today. Thank you, Rachel Cheeks-Givan.
To you and to the team, they're fabulous, and that's it. Thanks a lot. Take care.